again, having to offer Lord's prayers and condolence for another shooting, another senseless tragedy. Just a week ago, we were talking about what happened in Tennessee. Now, a week later, it's been another tragedy. This time in Kentucky. I'm sure you've all heard the story. His man, thankful for he went to one week, opened fire with the AR-15 style rifle, killing five of his colleagues, and then waiting for the police to ambush the police. And from what we know from media reports, one of those officers was shot in the head and is in very critical condition. So I thought some prayers with the family of the officer for him. For that is just part of daily life in America, and it seems as if our politicians, those who are supposed to protect us, don't have any answers. In fact, they're not even trying to find an answer from what I can see. So, again, to the community of Louisville, our thoughts and prayers are with you. So, today, I just wanted to touch on a few subjects. Subjects are important, and one of them is what happened now in Tennessee with the two senators that were expelled from the Tennessee House of Representatives. So as you probably heard, there were actually three state senators that were protesting gun violence in Tennessee. This on the heels of the shooting at the convent Christian school, where three 9-year-old children were slaughtered. A teacher, the principal, and a longtime employee custodian also killed. So these three senators, two young black men, Justin Jones, Justin Pearson, and their colleague, a Caucasian woman, whose name escapes me, they were protesting gun violence, and that there should be some action at the state level to protect the children of the state of Tennessee and others, of course. And what happened was, according to these young men, their mics were turned off. So one of them, I believe it was Justin Jones, pulled out a bullhorn, and he started to chant. And there were people in the galley who supported what they were doing. And I guess these two young men represent a new generation. And I guess they also pose a threat to the old guard. The old guard that is hesitant to address the issue of gun violence. The old guard that says, well, we are God-fearing Christian people, but you won't do a thing to protect God's people. What we need to be protected are the special interests and those money classes and organizations like the NRA, who always seem to show up after one of these shooting events. And apparently, at least in my opinion, they show up with more money for our legislatures to look the other way while our children are slaughtered in mass. Fortunately for these young senators, both of them were reinstated by Shelby County back to their office. But, for the Republican-led Senate,
that was crazy.
Yeah, I wonder what they were thinking, right?
They were thinking they were going to get away with it.
Yeah, they did, right? But the optics alone, you have two young black men and a Caucasian woman. The two young black men are expelled. The Caucasian woman is not. She's allowed to retain her seat, but two young black men are ousted from their democratically elected seat, and not for malfeasance, not for criminal life, because They were standing up for their constituents. These are the people that are ousted from the state house.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I just don't understand the thinking of these senators down there, the Republicans in that house that voted to oust them. Do you understand how this looks? You know, we're not dealing with the 1940s and 50s, right?
Well, nobody clearly thought it through. They thought that where they were at, and that the country and the world wasn't going to pay attention.
Well, they were very much mistaken.
Yes.
And I think that young men like this, and I got to tell you, these young men restored my faith in young people, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so much negativity you see, you know, from young people, right? Or young people portrayed in a negative light constantly. But these two young men, you know, I was so impressed by the way they handled this situation, you know, the lack of fear. And after they were reinstated, Justin Pearson, he gave a presentation. I guess he did it. And what he said was so reminiscent of what you might hear coming from Dr. King decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really so impressed and continue to be so impressed with these young men. But I think what it is, and this is across the country, Republicans, it appears, do not want young voters to go to the polls. And I think that the rationale is that many of these young voters are going to register Democrats and are going to vote along Democratic lines. You know, because I think, and you know, I'm neither Democrat nor am I Republican, right? Because I don't have a dog in that fight.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what happens is young people looking at their choice of political party, which party is more inclusive? Which party speaks to their issues? You know, which one is more open? Is it the Republicans or is it the Democrats? And, you know, currently it would seem as if the only choice is the Democratic Party, unless the Republicans can make some changes and be more open, more inclusive. But when you see stuff like this guy down in Florida, DeSantis,
Mm-hmm.
that Trump called Ron DeSanctimonious,
Mm-hmm.
he signed some bills down in Florida.
Late at night.
Right. You know, one bill is don't say gay. What are you supposed to say? And why can't you say gay? Then there's another bill, the anti-woke bill, right?
I still understand that one.
You know, it's what's to understand. I mean, what is it? And you know, if we're asleep, right? And we're on autopilot in this country. Us working class and poor people are just kind of allowing things to happen to us, and then we're trying to react to them. So we're asleep. Why would the government want us to stay that way? And all across this country, they're trying to stifle dissent. And it's exactly what happened in Tennessee, right? It's our way or the highway. We don't want the debate. We don't want discourse. We just want you to do what we tell you to do and go somewhere and sit down and shut up. And this is basically what's happening with this whole anti-abortion movement. You have a group of predominantly white Caucasian men telling women, hey, listen, you're going to have this damn baby, like it or not. Even in some states, even if it may cost you your life, you're going to have this baby. And they expect women to sit back and say, oh, okay.
No, that's not going to happen.
It's not. You know, I mean, the Republicans are losing race after race. They just lost the Supreme Court in the state of Wisconsin. And so many other seats, they're losing election after election. And yet they can't seem to figure it out. And even with all of the legal issues surrounding Donald Trump, you still have Republicans rallying to his defense. I mean, you don't have any constituents to represent. You don't have any other issues to take up in this country. Well, damn it, if you can't think of any issues, I can tell you. How about restoring the value of the dollar? How about creating some jobs, some high-paying jobs for working class and poor people? How about we fix the infrastructure? How about we stop these wars, these preemptive wars? How about we stop funding the war in Ukraine? Who are we benefiting by that? Corporations that are making money, the arms dealers, but it's not benefiting the people of Ukraine. Ukraine is being systematically destroyed by Russia, right?
Wiping them out.
So how are you helping this country? You're giving them weapon systems that they can't work with. So, I mean, at some point, when do we figure out? It took us 20 years to figure out we can't win this war in Iraq and Afghanistan.
You can't win a war with people that never.
See, now you're not a politician, I'm not a politician, but we figured that out, right? We don't have access to the classified information, the intel briefings, but we figured that out.
Mm-hmm.
And think about it. Everybody may have access to classified information. Nowadays, it's arrested a 22-year-old young man, 21-year-old young man who had classified information relative to the war in Ukraine. How the hell did he get that? So I don't know. I'll say this, and I'll say it repeatedly. This country has become an asylum for the criminally insane.
Yep.
And a lot of them are in Washington, and they call themselves the leadership.
Well, that's why I believe that the two-party system could work in this country, right? But it can't work without term limits. Okay. Because you got to get rid of that old second thing.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like all these young, progressive, young people that want to deal with issues that's relevant to them.
Right.
Like, for instance, when Mitch McConnell went to Washington, there was an anti-gay movement that society embraced. All right. And it's 50 years later, he's still there.
Right.
Right. His mindset hasn't changed. Right. Right. But the people change.
Right.
So you're in the way of progress. You know what I mean? So if they had term limits, as society changes, our politics would change in society. So we wouldn't have to have an issue saying who's woke and who's not woke.
Right.
You know what I mean? We would have to have this issue of abortion, anti-abortion, and all this other stuff. Because guess what? All these people that stand behind these issues, they don't represent their constituents because they're worried about themselves,
right, and
enriching themselves. Because you want to know why people get behind Donald Trump and his nonsense? Because if you're a congressman from a small little rural town in middle America, right, of poor people, right, love Donald Trump. You know Trump's a jerk. You know he ain't even helping. He don't care about these people in their community, but because they care about him because of what he says in their belief system, you're going to back Donald Trump. Because if you don't, they're going to put somebody else in there that's going to back Donald Trump, and they're going to vote for him, and you're going to be out. So your money, your millions that you're getting, is going to be going to somebody else. So what are you going to do? You're going to kiss Trump behind. You're not going to do nothing for the people because they're too poor and uneducated to understand what's really going on. That Donald Trump's a grifter, and he ran a scam on the entire country. But because at the core of America's existence is racism, right? That's all people can grab a hold of. Well, we finally got one of us in the White House. We don't care about nothing else, but he's one of us. He don't like them, so he's our guy. He can't do no wrong.
Well, you know what? You said the two-party system. sometimes I wonder, do we even have to?
Well,
Because on certain issues, they're always able to find common ground.
well, you know what they say, left wing, right wing belongs to the same bird.
It's all one bird, right?
Mhm.
You know, let's be realistic. They always come together when there's war.
Mhm.
There's always Republicans and Democrats who vote to send our young people into harm's way, right? They can always figure that out. When it comes to fixing what's wrong in this country, they don't have a clue because they're not even trying. Because reality is, they will never tell us how bad things are. And we, like I said, we're an autopilot. We are completely asleep, you know, and we're trying to react to these things as they happen. But if we in this country knew how dangerously close America is to total collapse, we would have, and we're not far from yeah.
That's right.
But when you consider the fact that so many major economies are shifting away from the U.S. dollar as the Fed World Reserve currency, eventually the dollar will collapse. There's nothing undergirding the dollar anymore. There's no gold. There's no silver. It's fiat currency. And,
Mhm.
you know, we have all of these countries now who are shifting away from it. We cannot continue these wars, these preemptive wars, to fight to maintain the dollar as a reserve currency. We can't fight in what's called the Middle East, which is nothing more than Africa,
Mhm.
and at the same time try to contain Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. You know, it's too big for this country, and even for NATO. And you know, one thing I have to give Donald Trump credit for is the fact that he was not on board with the expansion of NATO.
Mhm.
Since Obama, and going back to the Clinton administration, we've been pushing to expand NATO. So just last week, Finland became part of NATO, and Finland shares a border with Russia.
Mhm.
So now we have Russia surrounded by NATO forces and American-backed military, right?
Mhm.
And America's military hardware. You know, years ago, I'm talking Kennedy's president, he was ready for the war with the Union because there was a missile battle in Cuba,
Mhm.
90 miles from Florida. We were ready to go to war. We blockaded, you know, Cuba. Now that we have Russia surrounded with offensive weapons, we're saying Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. Vladimir Putin is a terrorist. Vladimir Putin is responsible for the war in Ukraine. We're not saying we had any part in this. We're just protecting democracy. Who's protecting democracy for Justin Jones and Justin Pearson when they were ousted from Tennessee House of Representatives?
Exactly.
Who is protecting or who protected the democracy and rights for George Floyd? And I mean, the list goes on and on and on. We talk about Breonna Taylor.
What's ironic is
Uh-huh.
you mentioned George Floyd.
Yeah.
You know that Chauvin, whatever his name was,
Mm-hmm.
that killed him?
Chauvin, yeah.
Chauvin.
Mhm.
You know, the state just settled all the lawsuits that was brought against him,
Mm-hmm.
to the tune of $8.5 million.
Right.
They had all these videos of him that went back to 2016 and 17, where he was putting his knee on people's necks,
Mm-hmm.
dragging people that's handcuffed, beating people with flashlights, where he was an aggressive, abusive man. And they said that had he been fired back in 2017, George Floyd would be alive today.
Well, you know, I remember from the case, they said that when he was charged initially, that there were 17 serious violations, right, of protocol or of just plain abuse that have been lodged against him. 17. Why was he allowed to stay on the force? I can give you one reason, and one reason only. He had reflection for the connect.
Absolutely.
If a cop or officer of color had done half of those things, they'd be off the force.
How about the one that shot that woman by mistake?
He's in jail.
He's in jail.
Right. He went quickly.
Right away.
And, which brings up another issue. There is a white supremacist, a current white supremacist, who's in jail right now for killing a black man.
Mm-hmm.
They were saying it was stand your ground. They used to stand your ground defense. And I believe this was in
George Zimmerman got away with that. So
yeah.
Thing, but yeah.
Well, this guy was ultimately convicted of this in Texas. And now the governor, Abbott of Texas, is considering pardoning this guy. Well, then they went back to social media where he's been making anti-black and anti-gay slurs and references for years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And also against Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
So wait a minute.
Yeah, and one of them, he said he can finally admit that he's a racist.
So, basically what you have are some elements of premeditated murder, right? You're just looking for an excuse.
Give me a reason.
Give me the reason, right? And he found it when he shot and killed this man, and now the government wants to let him out of jail. What are you saying to the black residents of Texas? What are you saying to black people across this country and around the world?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anybody stops to think for 1 second how the rest of the world sees America. See, I know for us growing up, in our generation, people looked at America as the land flowing milk and honey, right? There you go. Everybody wants to come to this country, land of opportunity. Everybody has a pot and a chicken to cook it in, right?
A house and a car and a garage.
There you go. But now, in the 21st century, 2023, the world.
If you want my opinion, right? And I mentioned this a few times before. You have to leave America to see how the world views America.
Right.
Because our allies aren't really our allies. I realized this many, many years ago. I was in the UK, Lincoln North. We went over to Prescott, just outside Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
And there, first of all our news is 75.
Oh, absolutely.
And the way the United States is viewed in Europe, we're hated around the world. Mm-hmm. The French hate us, the British hate us, everybody hates us. The British hate us because we broke away from them. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? They were allowed to pilferage the United States anymore. But outside the world, I sat there and I watched the news and I listened. There was something going on. There was something that was going on in the world at the time, and they talked about how the United States of America had their hand in everything negative around the world.
Well, that's true.
They're behind it. Like how we used to say the British was behind slavery, behind this and behind that. Well, that was hundreds of years ago. Mm-hmm. The modern day colonizer, the troublemaker, is the United States. And they paint the picture that the Chinese is the enemy, right? And they're filtering Africa. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, with the Chinese, they might be taking resources out of it. It's give and take, right. But they're building up Africa at the same time.
What you just said is what Dr. King said in 1967. He had a speech at Riverside Church. And he said that the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, our own country, the United States of America. And he said that in reference to America's aggressive tactics in Vietnam. We had no reason for being in Vietnam.
The French had already got their behind kicked.
They will run out. In 1954, 11 years before the first major engagement, the French were gone and said, we give up, we can't win this war. In comes America. Take a note from the French. You cannot colonize the people that refuse to be colonized. So I guess that is the rationale behind the anti-woke movement. Keep us asleep. Because if we wake up, you'll rouse the sleeping giant. And people are going to people are going to ask questions of our government, of our leadership. They have questions about our economy, our healthcare system, our retirement system. They keep moving it up. In France, they only moved it up 2 years. And people went buck wild. The measure has passed in France, but people in France have not given up.
Well, let's be realistic. If you pay attention to what they tell us every year about life expectancy, right? They said the life expectancy of the American man is like 72 years old.
We lost a year or two
because of COVID.
Absolutely.
This is like 72 years old. And the life expectancy of a woman is 75, right? So the United States of America already said, okay, you can retire at 62. Then they said, they pushed it at 65, then they dropped it to 62. Then they said, you can get your max at 67. But why do I want to work on 67 if you're expecting me to die by 72?
Right.
Does that make any sense?
It does not. But,
and that's why the French are losing their mind.
And I concur with them. I agree with them. I just wish that America would fight for more than guns. The only thing that seems to arouse the masses here is when what they perceive as a threat to the Second Amendment right. I mean, the Constitution has 27 amendments? Why are we only fighting for one?
Hey, we still 3/5 of the man.
There you go. But, in this country...
And we had a black president.
We did. And, that has not changed. So much has not changed. And, every year we have these conferences and these debates on the state of Black America. The state of Black America has been from the height in the 1960s, right? When we had so many movements, so many social organizations.
So that's why today we're being rocked to sleep. And it goes back to what I always talk about, our culture, what they allow to happen in our community, the music they put out. Remember, there was always a message in our music. It was always something positive. We communicated well through our music.
Absolutely.
Now, all black music is murder, death, killed, youth, drugs, rape, prostitution, drug use. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's the only message in our music. And what are our children doing? Look who our role models are for our young women.
Well, you know what? One thing our children
get rid of TikTok.
Well, you know what? The government is actually trying to get rid of TikTok. And I was in a barbershop yesterday, and I was listening to a young man, and he was saying that the government, yes, they're trying to get rid of TikTok. They put out a bill or measure that they want to pass. But the thing is it just TikTok? Or will they remove other social media sites that is not carrying the proper message? So if we allow TikTok, right, to be removed, say under the guise of protecting America's youth, right, what other websites would be shut down? And one thing about the government, once they take your right, you don't get them back.
Well, the biggest threat to society around the world right now is AI. AI is the biggest threat to the world because guess what? They can say you said anything that you didn't say. They can recreate your voice. They can recreate your signature. And I saw this coming almost 20 years ago because I'm part of that industry. But anyway, when they started having robotic surgery, when they could literally perform surgery from a computer, and the doctor didn't even make the cut. When they started doing that, Technology's taking over everything. You know what I mean? So now they have this AI thing, and they can. How many stories are going to be planted that's going to say that, oh, you love Donald Trump? Well, we have to turn the world against Donald Trump. So we're going to let AI create all these stories and these recordings and these text messages and emails to say nothing negative, all this negative stuff that Donald Trump said. He might not even say it.
Right.
But it sounds just like it.
Right.
It looks just like it. The video shows him saying these things when it's all AI creating everything.
Right.
That's the biggest threat to the world. Stuff like that.
And you know something? That's something that our politicians are talking about. And I mean, even if you just talk about the simpler things, like you go into the supermarket, they may have 2 cashiers, everything is self-checkout. Well, for every self-checkout line that they have, that represents at least in the supermarket, that represents at least 2 or 3 people that are unemployed.
20.
Right?
20.
Right.
The study said it's 20 people because they said the average supermarket is open for 16 hours.
On average.
You know, and they hire part-time people.
Right.
4 hours. So they say 20 people, 2 registers out of work.
Now, us growing up in New York, we can remember going over the Triborough Bridge. Mm-hmm. There was someone in each booth to collect your token or your change. Right. Now, there's almost nobody.
There's no booths.
Well, that's true.
All the booths are gone.
That's true.
I mean, an easy pass, you can get a bill in the mail.
Yeah, which is crazy, right?
Don't pay the bill in the mail, they're going to come tow your car. Or your car rents.
Or lock you or arrest you if you have enough tickets, right? But you know, all those are threats to America's economy in terms of job creation. Those were sought after jobs, right?
Absolutely.
You know, Tribal Bridge and Tunnel Authority,
absolutely.
Right? You know, I mean, Port Authority. I was at the Port Authority for 20 years.
Port Authority tolls are gone.
You know, almost nobody in the booth. They might have one person in the booth because you might have somebody from out of state or out of the country who does not have Easy Pass, right? Or if you have an oversized truck, you have to allow them to get through. You might have one person in the booth, right? But everything else is computerized, right? You ride up, Easy Pass, you read your Easy Pass, deduct the money, and you keep going. People think about the convenience of it. But what about the jobs on the law? Mm-hmm. And you know, being with the Port Authority, of course, I was there on 9/11. Well, after, or in the days and weeks after, the government came up with the Patriot Act. 9/11 was 22 years ago. Patriot Act is still on. Mm-hmm. So all those constitutional rights that we had that will protect us from unlawful intrusion is gone. Now they can surveil you, kick open your door. If they just say or make the accusation that you are a terrorist, they now have the right to do something called extraordinary rendition.
Well, let me ask you something.
Uh-huh.
You talk about the Patriot Act. Uh-huh. Was that no-knock warrant part of the Patriot Act, or was that before the Patriot Act?
That was part of the Patriot Act.
The no-knock warrant. Yeah. Yeah. So when they killed Eleanor Bumpurs, I'm going way back. That was way before 9/11.
That was in 80s.
That was in 80s. Mm-hmm. Wasn't that like a no-knock warrant when they did that to her?
As I recall, what happened with Eleanor Bumpurs, she was living in the projects, and housing was trying to evict her. But as I recall, she was, I think she had some psychiatric issues.
Yeah.
And wouldn't allow them access to the apartment. So the police came and tried to gain access. And eventually they called emergency services. And they got into the apartment and they said that Mrs. Bumpurs was holding her up. Now, mind you, they had shields, the big, heavy plexiglass shields. They had like a long pole that you could use to keep someone at a distance. But despite all of that, an ESU sergeant fired a 12-gauge shotgun at her to disarm her. The first shot basically blew her arm off, so she was no longer holding the gun. The second shot, which wasn't necessary, hit her in the chest, and that was a big shot. So if your goal is to disarm the suspect, and you shoot her with a shotgun and blow her arm off, why do you need to fire a second shot? The sergeant's defense was, at the time, there was no specific protocol for dealing with emotionally disturbed people. So today, in order to use less lethal means, we, security and law enforcement, we use things like a taser.
Okay, right. So you explain that, because you talk about the Patriot Act, and I wasn't sure exactly what happened on the bumpers, because I do know the police shot her.
Yeah.
Because they literally broke into her house.
Right. They were trying to evict her.
Okay, that's what it was. All right.
Yeah.
So now this Patriot Act that we have, that encompasses a lot of things. Mm-hmm. Surveillance, wiretapping.
Oh, sure.
Email. They can get into your email. They can do all these different things. They can contact. They can follow your relatives and your children and have all your banking information.
Mm-hmm.
What's not covered by this Patriot Act?
Well, I think what people need to know is that the Patriot Act, each of those letters in Patriot stands for a different section of the act itself, right? So the government has almost a blank check on what they can't do under the Patriot Act. And because we were so afraid and we were told that terrorists were lurking everywhere, we said, well, hey, look, whatever you have to do to protect us from the next act of terror, do it. We don't care if you're looking at our emails. We don't care if you're surveilling us. We don't care if there's cameras everywhere. We don't care if the government is now collecting data on Americans.
What's crazy also,
we don't care.
Facial recognition is real, right?
Yes, it is.
Do you realize that the technology constantly updating our facial recognition? You know that when you go, every time you go to the airport,
mm-hmm.
and you go through the scanner, or they check your ID, or you leave to come to the country, and they look at your passport, and they take a look into the camera,
mm-hmm.
it's updating your photo.
Yeah, well, the problem with facial recognition is the software does not work well for dark-skinned people. So there have been a number of mistakes that have been made using facial recognition.
Well, right? I think that's one of the main reasons why it's constantly being updated. Because there is a segment of the population, I don't know who it was. I read it, I heard about it. There was a segment of the population, for some reason I thought it was Asian people. Mm-hmm. That facial recognition had a lot of errors.
Oh yeah.
And they made it seem like it was making a mismatch of the photo and the name. Mm-hmm. Now it could be us too now.
Oh yeah, well they said that with the software, it has problems, recognizing darker skinned people, which is us, right? But that's just some of the things that the government is doing, right? And all of those rights that were taken under the Patriot Act. Well, the Patriot Act gets re-voted on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it keeps passing. So those rights that were taken are not coming back.
So in other words, that Patriot Act was something that was supposed to be temporary.
It was supposed to be, right? It was supposed to be something that was going to be a measure to protect us during this time of war, right? But of course, once the government takes, they're not giving that. You know, let's be realistic. The government doesn't care about your rights. The government doesn't care about you. The government doesn't give a shit about, excuse my French, the American people. If they did, I mean, we wouldn't have this issue over health care. You know, people want to say the debate in Washington is health care is a privilege and not a right. Who in the hell are you to say that health care is a privilege? What do you mean? How do you tell women, you know, that even though carrying this baby to full term could be, you know, dangerous to the mother, you're going to have this child. At the same time, you say we're a God-fearing country, right? We're a Judeo-Christian society. So we want children to be born. Yet, we don't want to put programs in place to educate them, to feed them, to make sure they have adequate health care, to make sure they have early childhood education, decent early childhood education.
What was the purpose of Planned Parenthood?
Well, you know, Planned Parenthood started out as the American Eugenics Society, right? And if you read up on the American Eugenics Society, these were the folks that we, you know, basically sterilized. These were the folks that believed in euthanization of people. They said were unwanted populations. So if you were, in that time they used the term feeble-minded, if you had some sort of disability, you know, they wanted to get rid of you. Well, when it came out that the American Eugenics Society, what their stated mission was, they changed their name and it came back as Planned Parenthood. Not a whole lot has changed over the years because where's Planned Parenthood predominantly? For neighborhood, right? And what do? Yeah, they do a lot of abortions. So, I mean, I don't think a whole lot has changed with that organization. You know, I mean, they came up with a nice name, a nice sounding name, and it makes them build some nice, kind of fancy looking buildings. But how they started is basically who they are to this day, you know. And I can remember probably in the early 90s, there was a birth control device that they came out with that would be implanted under the skin of women, like in the arm or something.
Was it IUD?
No. This was something like I think it may have been Depo.
Okay, yeah, it was like a little computer chip.
Right under the skin.
Yeah. Like a grain of rice.
And the problem was, so many women developed a number of issues related to this particular anti-conception device. So they started taking them out, but the damage was done. So years later, right, 30 years later, how many Black women and women of color do you hear talk about fibroid issues? How many women do you talk about that, do you talk to that had abnormal menstrual cycles? And there's a link between these women and in many cases that old device that was planted under their skin. Yeah, you had it taken out, but the fact that it was there for a period of time,
the damage was already done.
The damage was done. And what that did, because there was so many issues that came up, now your chance at conceiving, now that you want to get pregnant, your chances at conceiving are down significantly.
No.
Right. But that's another thing. I saw a study the other day that said across the planet, the numbers are down. It's difficult for women to conceive.
Unless you're in China.
Well, in China, India, and in parts of Africa, right? But in what's called the industrialized world, there's a lot of problems, right? Especially in this country, where you have so many people turning to these fertility clinics. But even with the fertility drugs, the chances are still, you're not dealing with 100%. You know what I
Well,
mean?
a lot has to do with, I think, going back to Planned Parenthood, right? Because in America, the American dream was to have a house and a car and a garage, a house with a white picket fence, and 2 children
And a dog.
and a dog,
Mhm.
right? If you had your son and your daughter, you didn't need any more children.
Right.
You know? So when people begin to achieve that, their numbers begin to shrink.
Mhm.
Whereas all the other folks who didn't believe in that principle, their numbers began to grow.
Mhm.
You know, the people of color had larger families.
Right.
So therefore, they no longer consider them minority.
Mhm.
You know? So I think so when it comes to fertility and numbers being low, I think that had a role to play in it as well.
Well, yeah, it did, right?
Once you had Buffy and Jody, that was it.
Right. Well, you know something? Down in Georgia, and I can't think of the town right now. There's something called a Georgia Guide. Are you familiar with it?
No.
Okay. So if you go down, and they don't know who erected these stones, but on one of the stones, it's written in several languages, but on one of the stones, it said that the stated goal of the people who put the Georgia Guidestones in place was to keep the world's population below 500. Right? So there have been a number of people, I believe it was Ted Turner, and others who said the world is overpopulated. So yes, there have been a number
Bill
of
Gates said that also.
well, yeah. So there are a number of people, influential people, who said this. So let's be realistic. These people aren't just going to talk about it; they're going to hear about it. So from the early '80s to now, how many plagues have we had? In '81, they came out with something called GRIDS, right? Gay men-related infectious disease syndrome, which later became AIDS. This was a virus that was never seen before. A retrovirus? What the hell is a retrovirus?
Stop. Are we gonna let you stop? I was just recently debating that what we now call HIV and AIDS,
Mm-hmm.
and that gay man disease,
Mm-hmm.
is it the same thing?
It's absolutely the same thing.
How can it be this argument?
Mm-hmm.
How can it be the same thing if it didn't affect women? It only affected men.
Well, initially, it was only affecting gay men in the Bay Area, right? That was where the first cases were found. So that's why it was initially called gay men related infectious disease syndrome. But later on, it was found it had crossed over. It was then the next group affected was IV drug abuse. Well, IV drug abuse are male and female, right? Then it got into the heterosexual community. I mean, Arthur Ashe died of it, right? So it got everywhere.
Well, apparently he had got it from a blood transfusion.
Absolutely. And you know something? How did the gay men in the Bay Area get it? Initially, when you went to do your hepatitis vaccine, they used to use actual blood. They would take blood, put it in a centrifuge to separate it. And from the serum, they would get the hepatitis B vaccine. So they were giving this to gay men in the Bay Area. Over time, it started to get sick. And if you go and you do the research, you find out that in Africa, what they were doing was they were inoculating people against smallpox that was tainted with AIDS virus. So during the mid to late 80s and early 90s, African population was being decimated by HIV. Well, the World Health Organization, doing the right thing, was giving them smallpox and but it was tainted. So, hundreds of thousands, millions of people in Africa died from HIV.
Now come fast forward to what's this thing that we just had?
COVID-19.
COVID-19.
Right.
How come it was so deadly to now it's dormant?
Well, here's the thing. And I'm glad you brought that up because there's some similarities there, right? So in 1981,
analytical.
No, it's good to be analytical. We all need to be analytical. We all need to wake up and understand what's happening. In 1981 is when we had the first cases of grids reported. So the government said we need to find the origin of the disease that's killing these people. They told us that it was a rhesus or green monkey, and that somehow there was cross-contamination from the animal world to humans, and that was the origin of grids that would later become known as AIDS or HIV. Okay, 1981. 2019.
Just so you know again,
Uh-huh.
grids, AIDS, HIV, all the same, right?
All the same.
But not the same.
Well,
how they define? They're not the same.
Well, I think it's the same virus, right? Or same virus syndrome. But 2019, people started getting sick with COVID-19, right? So the government, Biden said this when he was elected, we're going to find the cause of COVID-19. We're going to do research. He got in the office and they said a bad thing about it. Well, supposedly this time, so in 81, it was a monkey. Well, in 81, it was a monkey.
Right.
2019, this time it's a bat, right? So now you have, again, an animal, and there's cross-contamination with humans, and the virus can be traced back to an animal. Same story they told us 40 years ago is the same story they're telling us today. It was a lie then, and it's a lie now.
Yeah.
In fact, if you Google Dr. Gallo, I believe his name is, and you look at him on YouTube, he will tell you how they created HIV in a laboratory. And when COVID-19 hit, and I can't remember the woman's name, she wrote a book, and they're trying to discredit her. She worked with Fauci and Redfield and others in DC in infectious diseases. And she says in her book, so in Africa, you have these outbreaks of Ebola, which causes hemorrhagic fever and the death of the person who's infected. This woman said in her book, and she did a live, and you can see it on YouTube. But she says Ebola could not harm a human being until we took it into the lab. Chemical warfare, population control. This is the end game, folks. These people are not playing. They understand, right, the damage that they have done to the air, to the water. In some places, when this country was, I don't want to say the word discovered, stumbled upon by Columbus, they said that the woods were teeming with game, the waters teeming with fish. Now, in some areas, we've overfished. The coral reefs are dying. Global warming, right, is affecting the polar ice caps, making habitat for so many cold weather animals. Some of them may be facing extinction. So these people are, I guess they're above the 1%, understand that because of the damage we've done, the resources are dwindling. And if they're to survive, only way they could do it is to get rid of a hell of a lot of us. So I think it was one of the Rothschilds that referred to the masses as just mindless eaters. We don't need them anymore. You know, when we did manual labor, you needed lots of people. You could not have a plantation, a huge plantation, and not have any Africans on there to, you know, do the work, pick the cotton, get the tobacco, right? To cultivate, to grow, to do the, you know, to do all of the carpentry. We did it all. Well, now we shifted away. So now what we have is what you said, automation, like AI. So in some places, you might have one person just monitoring systems of a bunch of computers doing the work.
And
so
listen, what people realize, the first computers that became available to the public, that everyday businesses took in, each computer unemployed 10 people.
Well, yeah.
Each computer unemployed 10 people.
Well, look.
Every PC that came into an office.
Well, look. Did you see Hidden Colors? No, not Hidden Colors. Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures, yes, yes.
Okay. So all of those sisters were called what? Computers, right? Yeah. They would sit there and figure out the mathematics necessary, the calculations to get from Earth to the moon. Now you don't need them no more, right? So now you have high-speed computers that do all of the calculations for you. This was all done with pen and paper before, right?
And listen, I told people a story about a piece of software that we had 20-some, 30 years ago called Kraken.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, let's just say you left your job, right? And you changed the password on your computer. And now we can't get to your computer because you're left, you're mad. We had this program, it was on a disk. We put the disk into your computer, we turn your computer on. This computer looks at your hard drive, your disk, and all that to boot from.
Mm-hmm.
If nothing's in there, it boots from the hard drive. But if something's in there, it goes to the disk. That's why they gave you what they call a boot disk. So we put this disk in there with Kraken on it, so the machine boots from the Kraken disk. That disk program ran every sequence of numbers and letters and characters that it could possibly run. And it could take up to 24 hours before it found your password, right? But usually it would find it within an hour. Wow. And it would usually just stop. Because most people use simple work stuff, password. It would stop and it would show you what the password was.
Right.
And you go and open it and you change the password. They then said that was hackerware. They came up with hackers. They took that software, took it off the market, and made it illegal to use it. They said you're going to go to the penitentiary if you use the software. Right. They took it, supposed to destroy it. They took it and sold it to the Israelis.
Yeah.
They now call that software Pegasus. If you get out to Google Pegasus, Pegasus software, the Israelis sell it to all these countries all over the world for billions of dollars.
Something about that too.
Yes, to use it. And it was a cracker program to utilize it. So that's how when they say people can hack into your cell phone and get all your information, all the modern day hacking, cybersecurity issues are based upon Kraken, which is now called Pegasus, that's sold by the Israelis. How about that?
You know, it's crazy, right?
And when I think about it, I had that tip. Like a lot of people realize we got these new computers and everything else, but we don't realize that the basic format of a computer is DOS. Because we don't see a DOS screen, right? We assume that we evolved past DOS. DOS is still on this computer.
Right.
I can open up a screen and there's DOS. You know what I mean? And DOS still runs the world. You know what I mean? So that's what Kraken is to Pegasus. You know, it's still Kraken.
Right.
You know what I mean? But they improved upon it, and now they sell it. When that Khashoggi guy, when the Saudis killed that guy.
Yeah.
Well, who do you think sold the Saudis, who are supposedly their arch enemy?
Right.
They sold the program to the Saudis for $18 million or $18 billion or something like that. They sold that software for $18 million, $18 billion, and that's how they were able to find him where he was at when they were killed him.
You know what?
Pegasus software.
Well, yeah, but you know, business makes for strange bedfellows, right? If you are someone who is in business, corporation, you do business with anybody, right? Anybody that has the money, you do business with them. Enemies don't count, right? That's stuff that's stuff that they put on the news to make you believe this is the enemy. But in reality, right? Let's be realistic. We always talk about China. China's the enemy. Hell, everything from Walmart comes from China.
Guess what? The United States of America owe China. We in debt to China.
You better believe it.
We pay China every month.
Trillions of dollars.
Every month.
Right.
When they talk about the United States paying their bills, who we paying our bills to?
Right.
China.
And to the Saudis.
That's right.
Right. And
if you don't realize, the Saudis own Citibank.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Right. We're probably the biggest bank in America.
One of the biggest banks in America.
And I saw a documentary where they were saying that for the Saudi royal family, they have so much money that they have billions of dollars in 6 U.S. banks. If the Saudi royal family were to pull their money out, the American economy would collapse. Just like that, right? Because there's nothing holding it up.
Absolutely.
Right? So, of course, American businessmen who used to go around the world and demand of others are now going around the world
begging.
We're begging. This country has fallen so low, and the free fall continues. But you know what? It has been a great hour. It's just cool to kick it with you, TP.
Always a pleasure.
Oh yeah, man. This is great. I just hope that someone listening will get something out of this and begin to wake up. Right? Don't think the woke movement is just about this transgender thing. There's so much more to it. Right? Don't let the government define things for you. You define it for yourself. So we're going to see you here next Saturday. Hopefully, my partner in time will be here. Roman will be back. And we'll have another hour of power for you. We're going to talk about some real serious issues and things that you aren't going to hear, on the news. Because everything is just so sanitized. So, folks, continue to support Gynesis Radio on all the platforms. And we thank you, and we hope you appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Peace.
Man, Ron, I looked up. I said, holy wow, we was on the road just now.
Yeah. Darren Johnson is Stefani's husband?